please welcome to the stage your cruise director, Elliot Taylor.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for that warm welcome there. And I've noticed that numbers have dissipated somewhat as we've gone into the afternoon. A very good afternoon for those of you who have finally relented and gone back to your cabins as the weather picks up just a little bit on the outside. Some of you might think we're testing fate, playing Celine Dion's My Heart Will Go On as we approach the rougher weather this evening. And more so by the title of this talk today, Night Star, of course, the perfume of the Titanic, which is what we're going to talk about. Now then, ladies and gentlemen, an incredible lecturer I'm very proud to present to you today. He has a plethora of reading material which he's created over the years, and he's the only lecturer I've ever presented to actually have a book taken off Amazon. A rather controversial soul as well from time to time, but an incredible, incredible speaker, and you are going to really enjoy his series of talks. If you would please put your hands together, give a warm welcome to our stage to David Pybus. Good afternoon, David.
Thank you, Elliot. Thank you very much. Well, and thank you guys all for coming off your sunbeds today for today's talk. Yeah, the book is The True Identity of Jack the Ripper, which will be my next talk. It was taken off Amazon after 10 days. And I was told it was for manipulation, whatever that means. Yeah. If you come to Jack, you might see what the manipulation was. It wasn't by me. And the book is now available on Kobo. I'll explain that. Now, Alan this morning explained his background, and I'll explain a little bit of mine. As you've seen, an alchemist, originally a chemist with Boots and ICI and Unilever. I'm also what is called an aromancer. That's a dealer in aromas. A perfumer has a nose for perfumes. An aromancer has a nose for business, but business linked to perfumery. So those top books are all about my career, really, in perfume, scent, incense. Got to get that word right. And the bottom four are my hobby, which is mysteries, particularly solving them. So you're going to get a different talk, as I'll explain on the second slide. But today we're going to talk about a ship that sailed with that flag. And the reason I'm doing this talk today is to make absolutely sure that you get the talk before you get to Belfast. You may be doing lots of other things, which is fine. But if you're not doing anything, or if you're thinking, what can I do? The Museum of Titanic is probably one of the best ones I've been to. And I would certainly go again. So I would certainly recommend that if you're thinking about what to do. It's also about a man. In fact, this has 4 stories, 2 men and 2 women, who took a ticket, first class boarding pass for Titanic, and a little label, first class, this is important. It's the sort of thing you would put on your computer, that it's not going to steerage or baggage. I want it in my room. In his case, it was a bag of perfumes. So the talks I'm going to do, Titanic at the top and Sense of Time, which was my Dragon's Den company. It's dormant now, so you can't, well, you can buy the perfumes on the internet, some of them perhaps, I don't know. The True Identity of Jack the Ripper. Attentional shipping, which is about all the shipping areas, the 31 shipping areas around the British Isles, with a little story, a little anecdote, a little bit of fun and humour about every one of them. And by the time we finish this journey, you'll have done at least a third of them. So that's a pretty good, if you want to do the lot, you're well on the way. And then I've got a couple there, the history of passports and transport of delight. If they're spare, they're in the spare locker, just in case they're needed. And fellas, if you think perfume's not an interesting thing, and what's a Yorkshireman doing in that business, I would recommend that book by Patrick Suskind. And can you see the strapline on it, The Story of a Murderer? It is indeed a murder story. And if you want to learn about the perfume business and how they're created, I couldn't recommend a better book than that. Again, it's available on Amazon or wherever. So, Titanic. And my journey on Dragon's Den, where I went on and I got 80,000 from 2 of the dragons, and I brought out 5 of those 6 perfumes. 2 Egyptian, one from the tomb of Tutankhamun, one from the story and legend of Cleopatra, one from the Mayan kingdom of Mexico, Maya. Pixis was from the believe it or not, from Pompeii, that although Pompeii was incinerated, from the burnt seeds and flowers of a perfumer's garden in Pompeii, working with botanists and archaeologists, I could recreate, it's like a scene of crime reconstruction, a perfume from Pompeii. And then the one that didn't come out, interestingly, Chrism, tell you a little bit more about that later, 3,500 year history. This is the anointing oil of the kings and queens of England. So within a year now, we'll be seeing that in action. So just this one story, Sense of Time, Night Star. This is about perfumes that were lost in time through disaster, accident, whatever, found again, recreated, and put on the market. It's about an iceberg. That was supposed to be the iceberg that hit Titanic. A Polish sailor took that photograph 2 days after the disaster, not knowing anything about Titanic. And the reason he took it was because there's a red stripe along the base of the iceberg. It just looked peculiar, and he took a photograph of it. So that's the one that did for Titanic. And of course, we all know that that's only 2/9 of what an iceberg really looks like under the water. The story's about a bag that was retrieved. It's about the ship, and that's Titanic leaving Cobb. Now, it used to be called Queenstown, but Cobb in Ireland. It's about a broken dream. This is a porthole from the first-class cabin of Titanic. And the fragrance. The middle one there, Night Star. You can see, to make everything work with £80,000, I used the same bottle, but different graphics. That helped me buy the numbers of bottles and boxes, but all the perfumes are very, very different. And it's about this man with the very unpopular name of Adolphe. Now, it's Adolphe spelled P-H-E, not with an F at the end. He was born in Alsace-Lorraine, so it's the French spelling of Adolphe. Adolphe Saalfeld. This is him as a businessman, very smart-looking gentleman. This is him in Monaco going to a fancy dress. So two sides to Adolphe, the businessman and the fun lover. So a little bit about him. He's German, born in 1865. He lived in Manchester, you know, things like Jewish pogroms when they were thrown out of various areas of Europe and they came to Britain to live, and a chairman of a chemical company. Look at those prices, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if anybody's in cabin C106 at the moment, but he paid £30, 10 shilling for a return trip to America on the biggest, best ship on the planet at the time. And he died in 1926 with 42,000, nearly 43,000, a lot of money. So he was quite a wealthy man. We're going back. Sorry, I'm going backwards here. And he was a traveller, he was an adventurer because he was a moneyed man. Was he a chemist? Was he an alchemist? Was he a perfumer? He was learning the business of perfumery because he could see that this was really adding values to essential oils. If you put them together and make them live happily in a bottle, you can make more money out of it. He was a gambler because he went to Monte Carlo quite a lot and played the market. So again, he took a gamble because he went to America to try and ply his trade. And we can read a little bit about Adolphe because I've seen his book and I've seen what he wrote in his book. This is as you might be writing your journey on Saga today. This is what he wrote. I just had an hour's roaming about on this wonderful boat. I liked my cabin very much. It's just like a bed sitting room and rather large. They are still busy to finish the last things on board. He talked about things like planking and screws still on the floor and the smell of paint, fresh paint. They were still busy with the last touches of the Ship of Dreams. Why was he going to America? Well, you might have seen Western films where they say, this is perfume from Paris, France, as opposed to Paris, Oregon, or wherever. The perfume business in Europe was dominated. You will recognize, I'm sure, a lot of those companies, mainly French, but also like Worth and Crown and Yardley. Crown was the biggest of the lot. It provided the British Empire, if you like, but it went a long time ago. Yardley, still around in Birmingham, but the main ones, Houbigant, Lubin, Guerlain, Coty, They were the big ones. So this is Titanic leaving Corbo, as it says, Queenstown on its final journey. Tugboats taking it out. What was his experience? Well, he was a first-class traveller, but again, if you've seen the movie, there was a lot of snobbery, a lot of aristocracy on board. You were put in your place. He was Jewish. He was a businessman, so he was a little bit frowned on. But the ladies at the dinner table thought he was fascinating when he brought out little phials of perfume and talked about them. And believe it or not, I saw one phial of perfume that had a little slip of paper in it. So I realized that it was difficult to get the stopper out of the bottle. So he just put a little bit of paper in to help him. That was still there after 100 years of being 2.5 miles down in the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, when I saw these things and handled these things, my heart was just pumping. He was told to go, he went and had a port and cigar, felt a slight shuddering, again as you've seen in the film, was told, as you were those days, by officers, to go to his lifeboat station, which is number 3. Odd numbers are on one side, even numbers on the other side. I don't know whether you've ever noticed that. So he did as he was told. He went to a lifeboat. He was a survivor, and he was picked up by the Carpathia and telling a story that we'll move on with. This was his last letter as Titanic was moving around from Southampton, which it left Cherbourg in France, and then it was going to Queenstown before the Atlantic. Dear wifey, how about that for a Victorian or Edwardian phrase? After a fair night's rest and an excellent breakfast, I'm enjoying a promenade in glorious weather. The wind is fresh and the sea moderate, but on this big boat one hardly notices any movement. I write these lines just before we're getting into Queenstown, so that you get them tomorrow morning. There was, in fact, a post from Ireland. I shall not be able to write to you again before getting to New York. Fondest love to all, Adolphe. I'll write to you when I get to the office, and Eric will no doubt phone you on arrival. So that was postmarked 4:30, April 12, 1912. 2 days later, roughly 2.5 hours after striking an iceberg, Titanic went down. So there's a little bit on Adolphe, and we'll come back to him in a minute, but I'd like to introduce another character. Often people on ships are asked to sell their books or whatever, and I was asked to, on the last day of one particular cruise, in a fair with everybody else, sell my wares, and I didn't really want to, because my perfumery books are quite complex chemistry, really. They're not for an average audience sort of thing. They're for scientists, really. But anyway, I sat there with my books, and I looked at the next bookstall, and I saw that book, Polar the Titanic Bear, and the label on it, White Star Liner, and I thought, Spedden. Why do I know Spedden? I thought, my goodness me, Spedden, the young boy Spedden, he was on the same lifeboat as my man, because again, I did a lot of research, and I found out that he was on the same lifeboat as Adolphe Saalfeld. Remarkable coincidence. So from his book, I got his little story. There he is with a treasured polar bear. It's a stiff bear. It's probably the most expensive stiff bear of all of them. So he's playing. Today he'd find it a bit difficult, wouldn't he, with a spinning top on deck, but there you go, playing with his spinning top. And then at the same time as Adolphe felt that shudder, they were told to go downstairs to dress in warm clothing and make it to their lifeboat station, women and children. So there he is, still with his little bear, if you see it there in the background, with his nanny getting him ready, because these, again, first-class passengers. They were doing the European tour with places like, if you've ever been there, Reed's Hotel in Madeira. So all the classic places that people now go to, they were doing. And of course, that huge drop to the sea, quite frightening drop to the sea. I can promise you whatever's coming, ladies and gentlemen, by the way, there aren't any icebergs where we're going. So that's a good start. And then moving away from Titanic. And so from the pictures, Adolphe's probably there in the picture, in the lifeboat, with Douglas Spedden and his mother and nanny. What did he say about it? I saw a few men and women go into a boat, and I followed, and when lowered, pushed off, and rowed some distance, fearing Titanic sinking. As we drifted away gradually, saw Titanic sink lower and lower, and finally her lights went out, and others in my boat said they saw her disappear. Our boat was nearly 2 miles away, but the pitiful cries could be plainly heard. No one in our boat knew how many lifeboats were on Titanic, but there was ample time for saving everyone on board, had there been sufficient boats. Well, we'll come to that story in a second. So there's lifeboat number 3, rowing away, and eventually a boat did pick them up, Carpathia. You know, when they fired the rockets, because they had had 6 iceberg warnings, and other ships had hove to and waited for the morning, waited so they could see. But Titanic just ploughed on. And when they sent rockets up the back, other ships could see this and thought, oh, they're having a party. They're having a huge party. It must be that big ship that's just been launched. So nobody had a clue what was going on. And that's a dirigible, a rubber boat. That was the last boat to be picked up by Carpathia. So over 1,500 people went into the sea when Titanic sank. There were 20 lifeboats in the area. Only 1 came back. The 700 people in the others waited to live, to die, or for absolution, which would never come. Now that was from the film, but I can assure you that lived with Adolphe for the rest of his life. Those shouts, those screams, and that experience, that total trauma. So there's a little polar bear. The little boy left him in the lifeboat, but luckily a sailor found it, and it became the Christmas story. Can you see 1913? My story of the polar bear. The Board of Inquiry finding is quite interesting. 6 iceberg warnings, ploughed on still. No binoculars for the lookouts. The binoculars were in a cabin at the bottom of the mast. There was no key to get in. So they only had human vision in the mist, in the drizzle, in an ice field to see. And of course they saw it too late. There was enough room in the lifeboats for all the women and men and 500 plus of the men. What is that saying? There weren't enough lifeboats for everybody on board. And this statement by Lord Mersey that he was satisfied, I can be satisfied that the explanation of excessive proportion lost is not to be found in the suggestion that the third-class passengers were in any way unfairly treated. They were not unfairly treated. That's a lie. That's a whitewash. You saw a little bit of it in the film. I know it was pure Hollywood, but no doubt about it. The statistics show that those in second and third class, many more lost their lives than the first class passengers. So Saalfeld, 1 o'clock, a lifeboat leaves Titanic, and by 6:30, i.e. 5.5 hours on the sea, he was picked up by Carpathia. The last lifeboat was picked up nearly 2 hours later, then they headed for New York. And here's his words again. The captain and officers of the Carpathia did all that was possible to make us comfortable, and to those that were sick or injured they gave their tenderest care. The icebergs were huge and the weather extremely rough on the voyage to New York. There's the Carpathia. They docked at another dock in New York. They didn't dock at White Star. They were quite afraid of the paparazzi being around, and they wanted to get these people who'd had an incredibly traumatic experience away from that. So Polar, the Titanic bear, his story ends now. Douglas Spedden, 7-year-old, got his little teddy bear back, and it's still around. We go back now to Titanic, which went down, as you can see, in mid-Atlantic, way down the bottom, 2.5 miles, as I'd said, and down the tail of the huge bank, the Laurentian Bank, with the latitude and longitude exact as we know it now. To give you an idea of that depth, I don't know if you can see, I'll magnify this for you. That bit there, that's the Empire State Building, just to scale. So you can see how far down it went. In fact, when I met the diver that went down there, his name was Dick Barton. What an incredible name, Dick Barton, Special Agent. He's a little guy, but with muscles, you know, he was ex-SPS. And I said, didn't anything frighten you going down 2.5 miles? And he said he used to get a bit worried when a sperm whale hit the line. Can you imagine a big whale going past and hitting his line, and they knew what it was. So yes, I couldn't do it myself. I'm partially claustrophobic, so wouldn't like to try it. So we move on. We move on nearly a century now in time to the French submarine Nautil. And again, that's what it looked like. That's a fish lens view of these guys. And the very first photos they saw of Titanic after 90 years. There they are looking around it. So there were 3 wrecks in a way. The front, the bow and the stern broke in half and the engines fell out down the middle. And the blue shaded lines, that was the debris field. People were not allowed at the time to go into the wreck. Nobody was looking for bodies, skeletons or anything like that. They were just looking in the debris field to see what might be of interest. Whatever they found could not be sold on today's market. If you took something off Titanic, and indeed Adolphe took his menu card off, that could be sold, that could be auctioned, but not these artifacts. They were treasured. So there's the grab of the submarine picking up things that looked interesting, and there's the red dots are the points of the debris field that became very interesting because they held most of the stuff. And it could be anything, clothing, crockery, anything. Think of what's on this ship, for instance. And they found a bag. And this is the bag that we're interested in. So a little bit of a cartoon story now. They found a bag, and it had, it wasn't marked Moritz Mädler, it was just marked with a big M. And I recognized that name. I'd been in Bahnhofstrasse in Zurich before, and I knew that that was a luxury leather maker, and they were still around. So it was a bag like that with files in it. And literally, the grab had crushed this bag, broken a few files that had rose in them. And you know that expression, coming up smelling of roses? It really did. When I read that, I thought, there's perfume in there, or there's some aromas, some aromatic oils, some essential oils. This is really interesting. So I went to America and I came back with that bag, and we had a good look at what was in it. And if you can imagine the bag and what it was like, you know, like a Mexican bandolier for bullets, they looked like that, with the things in them were like cigar tubes, which I'm sure you know, like aluminium cigar tubes, and inside those tubes were the files. A bag like that, which was the Edwardian brochure of Moritz, and there's the M that I'd recognize. Sorry, and there's some of the files, and you can see the, I'll just go over that, look, you can see the aluminium files there intact. Some of them weren't, but a lot of them were. Being looked at there. When I went to the warehouse, a secret warehouse at a secret address near New York, they had experts in everything, in leather, in clothing, in every single piece of material you can think of, looking at these. And guess what? I was the perfume expert that they asked to come along and tell what was in the bag. There they are looking at a few of the samples. And that's what they looked like. So the files were intact. I couldn't believe it. 2.5 miles down. Why had they not exploded? Why were the labels still stuck on them? That's incredible glue. And I could read the writing. This, for me, this denies all physics. I'm thinking maybe everything is different 2.5 miles down under that pressure. I just could not believe the ink had not faded, that the labels were still on. And they asked me, do you use dog in perfumery? And they asked me, what is this Werrily product? And the magic eye, I said, you've got to look at these labels a little bit, and then it clicks what it is. So I knew what it was. Werrily is not Werrily. He was German. He wrote with a Gothic script. It's an N. It's neroli. And neroli is an essential oil from the bitter orange tree. So I knew, wow, there's an essential oil of neroli in there. And dog, well, they'd noticed Dalmatian. But it wasn't the dog Dalmatian. It was the Dalmatian coast of Yugoslavia. And therefore I knew they've got oak moss in there, or they've got rose in there, because they were the two big essential oils that you got from that part of the world. So a lot of them were like that, in a heck of a state. And you can see there's not much you can go. But there in the middle was that. Now again, historic artifact. What are you going to do? You can't break that. So we put like a needle, like a needle for a vaccination needle, through the cork, and took out just a few drops, brought it out. It's still intact. And when I was asked what it would smell like, I said, well, these are the Edwardian fragrances of the time. And to explain these fingerprints, you've got 14 different aroma directions. It's a bit like talking about music and saying, do you like jazz? Do you like folk? Do you like rock? Do you like heavy metal? There's 14 areas, and they're all listed there. So we've got citrus, herbal, aldehyde, green, marine or ozone, the smell of the sea, fruit, floral, spice, wood, leather, animal, musk, amber, sweet, powdery. Now, most of these around the same time were floral, they were fruity, and they had what I call animalic. Animalic was civet cat, musk from the musk deer, amber, ambergris from the sperm whale. All now endangered species, and myself and many colleagues made sure by the end of last century we got out of animal derivatives in perfumery. They're not needed. We're good chemists. We can make the aroma equivalent of things like that, so we got out of them last century. I know that's not a long time ago, but at least it was something worth doing. So what I was saying was, they're going to be floral. He might use natural, and natural is very expensive, but there were new synthetic products coming out at the time. And certainly they would be a little bit animalic, because people those days didn't have an outside toilet. Yeah, they didn't wash very well, the great unwashed, even the aristocrats, even first class. So perfume was used still to mask body odors. Very rare now to get animalic fragrances. So there were raw materials of what I call the first water, using the analogy of gemology. They were incredibly rare and different essential oils. There were finished fragrances as well as the things that make them up. So if you like, there wasn't just the bricks and mortar, there was the finished product. And a mix of both natural and synthetic. Now, you don't have to look at the complexity of that. All I want to say is we put them through very sophisticated, those couple of drops, very sophisticated scientific machinery, worth millions, gas layer chromatography, which would tell you by the way that that is filtering down the tissue which chemical it was, or NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance. Some of you may have been in an NMR machine. And that was fingerprinting the fragrance, seeing what chemistry made it up. So quite complicated, and the most complicated thing of all, the human nose. So perfumers were smelling it. And indeed, my colleague who worked on this with me is now chief perfumer at a company called Chanel, which you may have heard of. So how complex? Well, this is a little poem I wrote about the nose. The nose, it is a wondrous thing. It lets all kinds of smell go in, gently warms them in its maze, then checks and probes that scented haze, and lets you know it's cardamom, or aniseed, or fruity gum. It tells the jasmine from the rose. How does it work, do you suppose? 10,000 odors it can tell, this providential sense of smell. A Nobel Prize awaits the one who figures out how this is done. We still don't know. We know about touch, we know about sight, we know about hearing. We don't know still about the sense of smell. Is it molecular? Is it vibration? You can get one molecule that is left and right-handed in space. The right-hand one smells of curry. The left-hand one smells of spearmint. What's happening in our brain to make that distinction? So the human nose is better than any machine. And this guy now from Chanel told me, he said, do you know what? The rose in this and the formula reminds me of La Rose Jacqueminot. I said, I've never heard of that, La Rose Jacqueminot. He said, yes, Jacqueminot was a favorite general of the Napoleonic Wars, and the French loved him so much they named a rose after him. There it is, it's by Coty, La Rose Jacqueminot. There it is. And I said, my goodness me, I couldn't have made this up. Rose and Jack, the two lovers in Titanic, La Rose Jacqueminot, I could not have made this story up, even though I might be the best storyteller of the lot. So the link to Rose and Jack. And people ask me, where should I keep perfume? And I always say, in the cold, in the dark. I didn't mean 2.5 miles down in the Atlantic, but my goodness me, in terms of preserving this stuff, it worked. So these are the sort of areas, Lorigal, Low, Imperial, La Rose, Jacqueminot. And I'd said Saalfeld's dream would be realized nearly 100 years on, because we were going to launch the Titanic fragrance. What would we call it? What about Stella Maris? You know, that the star at the back of the ship, the wake of the ship? Or Rosa Maris, the Rose of the Sea? MGY, which was the call sign for Titanic. 401, which was its number when it was built in Liverpool. Tir Nan Og, the land of eternal youth, where Titanic was going when it was last seen leaving Queenstown or Cobb. Or the heart of the ocean, like the jewel from the film. But we actually called it, at the end of the day, Night Star. And there it is. The head notes come off in 15 minutes. Bergamot and lavender. You know the smell of lavender. Bergamot, maybe you drink Earl Grey tea. It's that citrus smell, gained from the bitter orange tree. The floral heart, rose, violet, heliotrope. Love that heliotrope. Sun lover, like sunflowers. Finally, after 2.5 years in the dark, this flower saw the sun again. Orris, which is from the iris flower, and it's very dry, powdery sort of smell, and lily of the valley. And down in what I call the soul notes, sandalwood, vanilla, and hawthorn blossom. So that's what comprises Night Star, the fragrance of the future. And that was part of the, as you can see, the background there, the fragrances. You see Titanic behind me. I was known as the Indiana Jones of the perfume business because I did what I did. And you can see on the left-hand side there, Elizabeth I holding the anointing oil. Now, I've been in contact with the Duke of Norfolk, who organises coronations, and indeed Charles, when he was Prince Charles, for 20 years now, talking about the formula of this oil. It's 3,500 years old. It needs fixing just a little bit. I might end up, you know, like HP Sauce as a royal warrant. You never know. But obviously, communication's still ongoing over that aspect of next year's coronation. So there's Night Star. It came in a box. It came with a booklet. All of the perfumes came with booklets explaining how they were lost and found and recreated. The business, at the end of the day, we closed it in 2012. Prophetically, 100 years on from the sinking of Titanic, the business also sank. What happened was the banks, if you remember, went down in 2008, and the little guys that could make us a couple of hundred at a time went bust, and the big guys wanted 5,000 at a time. Now, any of you in business know that that cash flow situation is impossible. We would have had to put our house on the line, and we weren't, Kath and I weren't prepared to do that. So we moved on, but we tried, you know. What did Titanic do? Class system. You might have a bigger cabin, but you're not treated any differently in an emergency. You go with everybody else. There's a lifeboat seat for you. We've got radio now, we've got sat-nav, we have ice patrols, and we've moved beyond Morse code. So that's what Titanic did. It made you very, very safe on a ship. Now, another human story, Miss Elizabeth Ramel Nye. When I was in this factory looking at these thousands of artifacts, I saw that, a present from Folkestone. I live in Folkestone. Why wouldn't I be interested in where that came from? And it came from that lady who survived Titanic and became very senior in the Salvation Army in America. She was going to America to live. So again, quite a coincidence to see that. And Millvina Dean, the last survivor, 2-month-old baby on Titanic when it went down, lived in Southampton. And I'm pleased to say Millvina got the very first bottle of Night Star the year before she died. So something good came out of that as well. But this is dedicated to Adolphe. You know, he boarded the ship of dreams. He had his dream, which he moved from Manchester to London, but of course he couldn't take away the baggage and the trauma. He had his driver, his chauffeur, drive him around at night because he couldn't sleep. And he sold the business. He just finished him, and he died not too long after. So I tried my best to relive his dream by bringing out Night Star. And he's buried in Golders Green Cemetery in London, and his dream buried with him, I guess. Titanic now is really going badly. These rusticals, it is going to collapse, and it is going to be no more within 50 years. And there, of course, is the front where we saw Rose and Jack, the two lovers. My last 500 bottles of Night Star went to Hong Kong by auction. They were sold at auction by a specialist in devices who sell things from Titanic. Now, I told you, you have to have brought them off with you. One of the things was, believe it or not, a violin case. Obviously belonged to the band. It was found floating. And it was at the same auction as my raw materials, my product. So Dragon's Den, that dream ended as well. And because of the numbers and because of the state of the weather, if you like, we decided we wouldn't do it today. But we do promise you, ladies and gentlemen, that Kath, my wife, will be at the back one day. There's also something happening at the back, so would have been a conflict there. Would you like to smell Heart of the Ocean? Well, if you would like to smell it, we have a bottle of it. We're going to spray it on smelling strips, and you can take that home. Probably do it after my third talk, which is attentional shipping. And there we're going just past Southampton at the time, the place that Titanic left on its first real journey. So it's very appropriate. And you can also take it home. If we did it now, it would have evaporated by the time you got home. So be a little souvenir for you. And we're not charging anything at all. So that's the story of Titanic, the perfume, Adolphe, Millvina, Douglas Spedden, and Mrs. May. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've never heard anything like that at all, and you won't hear these stories in the Museum of Titanic, but you will see some marvelous things that will stay in your memory. Thank you very much for your time.